Welcome to the Sword and The Trowel, a podcast of Founders Ministries. Founders exist for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of local churches. I'm Tom Ascol.
And I'm Graham Gunden.
And we are glad to be with you today. And we also have a special guest here with us today, Tom Buck. We'll introduce him in just a moment. But before we get going and talking to Dr. Buck today, we have an announcement to make to you to let you be aware of an opportunity that exists to you this week.
Yeah, in 5 short days, we will be celebrating the 504th anniversary of the Reformation, that day in which Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door at Wittenberg. So in order to celebrate that, we are having a Reformation Day sale at Founders Ministries. This sale runs from today until the 31st. And if you buy anything from Founders Press, you get 31% off that purchase. But the real deal is that when you buy something from Founders Ministries, you get 20% off registration for the Founders National Conference.
20% off. Now,
20% off.
We were talking earlier, Graham, and I thought you made a great point, but Hannah vetoed it, that since it's the 504th anniversary of Luther's nailing those theses to the door at Wittenberg, there should be a 504% discount.
Yeah, I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was great for marketing, but maybe not very economical.
Well, you know, what we make up, or what we lose in profit, we make up in volume. So there we go. That's the strategy here at Founders. Well, we've got the conference coming up in January, and you can get a discount on that if you buy books this week from Founders Press. But we want to mention this conference because Tom Buck's going to be speaking at the conference. It is on the doctrine of the church, militant and triumphant. And Tom will be joined by Vodi Balcom, Conrad Mbewe, James Coates, and Travis Allen. And I'll also be speaking. We're looking forward to this. It's January 20th through the 23rd. We're actually going to have a pre-conference the day before as well. So that's on Wednesday as a pre-conference. The conference starts on Thursday. And then that Sunday, both Vodi and Conrad, and we hope James, if he can arrange his schedule, will be preaching in at least 2 churches here in our area. So you might want to just plan the whole weekend. And in fact, the Vodi will be teaching his course on cultural apologetics before the Founders Conference. So that will start the Thursday and Friday before, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the week of the Founders Conference. If you need more information, just go to founders.org, Militant and Triumphant, the Doctrine of the Church.
And you can register for the course that Vodi's teaching at IOPT.org?
Yeah, or Institute of Public Theology.org, right. So thanks for mentioning that as well. And that's open to auditors as well. So if you're not registered as a full-time student at IOPT, which you should be, but if you're not, you can audit the course and other courses that are coming up in the spring as well. Well, today we're delighted to have with us Dr. Tom Buck. Tom's an old friend, and he is a fellow who pastored here in Florida. I think that's when I first got to know you. And then somehow, I don't know, would you draw the lottery to get moved to Texas? How did you get welcomed into the Republic of Texas, and how long ago was that, Tom?
Well, I got here as quick as I could. So it's been 15 years now. It'll be 16 years this spring.
Wow.
But the church that was here in Lindale was looking for a Southern Baptist church. It was looking for a Reformed guy that was a Southern Baptist, and they were also looking for a guy that was a dispensational, interestingly enough, in his theology. And there's not a lot of those out there. 5-point SBC guys who are also dispensational. And so they asked me if I would consider coming, and Lord worked it out, and we came here, and just thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. Hey, Tom, have you ever stopped and asked yourself the question, why there aren't very many of the guys like that?
Well, there's few people in the world that get it right, but
they were looking for an almost Reformed pastor.
I mean, I'm in John MacArthur's camp, so I'm in good company.
Oh, yeah, there you go. You played the ace card, so we're backing it off now. Yeah, so it's First Baptist Church Lindale, right?
It is First Baptist Lindale.
And you guys have a website that people can go to learn more about you?
Yes, fbclindale.com. We'll give them any information about our church and where all of our preaching ministry is up, and don't download it and preach our sermons. Don't do that. But anyway, sorry.
And don't download your sermons and compare them to other people's sermons, right? You probably can do that pretty safely. But I can also testify to the barbecue there in East Texas. Tom, you took me to a place, I forget the name of it.
Stanley's,
and I think we had to wait in line, but it was well worth it. So it was delicious barbecue in the piney woods of Texas. Well, Tom, thank you for coming on the podcast, and thanks also for agreeing to speak at our upcoming conference on the doctrine of the church, militant and triumphant. And, we've gotten some interesting comments about, why you guys have to be so in people's face, and why are you talking about militant? And, don't you believe in Jesus and the gentle Jesus? And, why are you being militant? So have you thought about that? Have you heard anything about that in your participation in a conference that's going to be dealing with church militant?
No, I haven't heard anything about it. Of course, I'm just now coming on to speak for it. So you asked me just a couple of months ago or whatever, but I'm excited about it. I think that Christians need to think through what it means to stand for truth, what it means to be a gospel warrior. I just think that often people don't think of those two words going together, but they certainly do. And, Jesus even talked to his disciples about, as they went out to take a sword. Now, of course, as we think about advancing the gospel in this world, we are coming up against all kinds of hostilities, and I just think Christians don't know how to think through how we can exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, and at the same time be bold and be willing to fight for truth. I just think those seem like oxymorons to people, but they're not. I look forward to the conference.
Yeah, I do too, and I think you put your finger on a very important matter that we're just not. In our churches today, we're not thinking very deeply, very biblically. And so this idea of militancy just seems antithetical to the gospel. And yet it's not. We're not talking about picking up literal swords and weapons and going out, and trying to establish an earthly kingdom in a forceful way. But we are talking about what the Bible talks about when it uses language of warfare, when it uses language of standing firm and being thoroughly equipped, taking up the armor of God, the sword of the Spirit. I mean, this is all biblical language, and it's in the Bible for a reason. And so to be militant as a Christian or to be militant as a church, historically, is just meant to be the church. It's the church in history. We're not finished yet, and we have been told that the very gates of hell will not prevail against the church, which suggests, doesn't it, that we should be storming the gates, that we should be advancing in the work of the gospel throughout the world, which is, everybody thinks about that. If you're a Christian, you realize that we have a job to do, and that job should be done with the same kind of commitment that warriors have to conquering evil enemies and to withstanding the onslaught of enemies.
Yeah, and Paul tells us in Ephesians 6 that we do wrestle against rulers and cosmic powers and authorities, and so we are at war. We are in a struggle against these things.
Yeah, and sometimes those spirits don't stay disembodied. Sometimes they do actually enflesh themselves. And again, we shouldn't be surprised about this. Jesus told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And what's going on there? Well, I think there's a militant stand for the accomplishment of the gospel, which he was on his way to do, going to Jerusalem, that Peter said, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think we've lived so long in a culture, too, that where we have not had persecution coming at us, that we don't know how to respond to those things. And there's been in the church, I think, a cowering rather than a courageous stand when we come under attack.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things we've talked about here some is that in America, we have had it so good so long because of God's blessings. And I believe most Christians would acknowledge that it's because of God's blessings in this country that we've benefited from so many ways that life has been easy for us, that we've come to think of that as normal, that this is regular Christianity. When you take what's happened here in the United States over the last 200 years, or maybe go back even a little further than that, and compare it to what's happened over the last 2,000 years, basically anywhere else in the world, I mean, there are exceptions, but the overwhelming majority of Christians for the history of the New Testament church around the world could only dream or try to imagine of what we have lived with day in and day out for generations here, because of God's blessings. And we think that that is typical. And so we tend to become friends with the world. We tend to become kind of lulled to sleep to think, well, yeah, things really aren't that bad. And why should we take stands against these, what I see as movements towards statism, where the government is God, regarded as God, or refuse to kowtow to other legitimate authorities when those legitimate authorities step outside the realm that God has given them their authority to operate within. And consequently, it just exposes a lot of superficial thinking, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and it's interesting because on the cusp of this coming out of this incredibly, easy time for the church in which we haven't faced persecution, you have certain Christian leaders saying, "Oh, we don't want to lose what we've had for so long," and I think that's right. And you have other Christians saying, "Oh, whatever we had before doesn't matter. It led to prosperity, it led to peace, that we could proclaim the gospel. But all that's it's secondary. We don't need to work for that. And so if it all crumbles and we fall into Roman Empire type persecution, then that's good too."
Yeah, it's almost like a longing for persecution to show how much we really do love Jesus.
Yeah, and the argument is, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, and if we suffer persecution, the church will grow. Well, that's not necessarily what happened in Japan.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's so many times in church history in which persecution really has stamped out the church.
Yeah. So, Tom, tell us what's going on there in First Baptist Lindale and how you guys have tried to navigate things over the last year and a half, 2 years or so, and where things are now. What are you seeing God do?
Well, it's been it's obviously been an interesting season for our church. We've had to navigate not just the situations in our culture, but we've had to navigate the situations in the SBC. And that is, added to it complications. I found it to be a very difficult time to pastor, because what I want to be able to do is shepherd my flock and preach and disciple and all of those things, and not be distracted by the things that are going on in the world. So it's learning to figure out how to respond to what's happening in our culture, respond to some of those things that are bleeding over into the Southern Baptist Convention, all of those things affecting our church. Helping people think through this pandemic time, where we still have some people, that are fearful of what's going on and have not yet united, come back to be with the body. I've never been in a time that's more maybe problematic is not the word, but just more challenging than what we're dealing with right now, because it seems to be things from every angle. I don't know if you're experiencing that or not.
Yeah, we are. I mean, it was disorienting early in 2020. And I remember some of those elders meetings, we spent hours and we would exegete executive orders from our governor. And, and we probably ought to preserve those emails back and forth, where what does it mean by service? What is an essential service versus an essential business, and all of that. And there were things we never had to think about before. And it took a lot of time and a lot of energy, and God helped us as an eldership to maintain unity through that. Even when we had some serious concerns and disagreements at points, God brought us through it. But yeah, the challenges were just incredible. From that, however, by God's grace, we came through with great unity, and I think we've seen some real fruitfulness in the inner workings of our eldership and in the whole church over the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
So that's been a good thing. The SBC stuff you brought up, how you guys navigating that? What's going on in First Baptist Lindale with regard to your Southern Baptist connections and the voluntary affiliation?
Well, I think that one of the things that was very helpful was taking our full slate of messengers this year to the convention.
How many was that?
Pardon me?
Did you have 12?
Yes, we had 12.
Oh, okay.
We took a full slate. And those folks got to see firsthand what's going on in our convention. And that was quite helpful in one sense, because they got to see it. In the other sense, there was not anybody that left that wasn't very discouraged when they saw everything that took place. But that allowed us to start having a conversation more as a church, because I've been I myself have been that lone spoken outside voice, public voice, I should say, for what's going on in the SBC. And our people have been trying to catch up with that, because there's so much going on. And, why is our pastor speaking out publicly about these things? And then I get attacked and criticized for that. And, it makes them wonder, why is this taking place? What other people are, really concerned? Is this an overreaction? Our other, pastors, elders have also had a voice as well. But what we're doing is we've tried to figure out a way to involve the congregation in this. So we have last night we actually had a members meeting and formed a task force committee that's going to look into all of the concerns that we have. Concerns with the North American Mission Board. Some of those have been addressed, at least to one degree or another. Concerns with the seminaries and their unwillingness to address the plagiarism. Some of the seminaries unwilling to do that. Concerns about the standpoint epistemology that's taking place and other critical race theory issues in our seminaries. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on. So we formed a task force to look into that. That will have all the pastors, but will include quite a few of our congregational members as well to look into these things and come back with a report to the church on what we found and what recommendations we would make to the body.
And Tom, that must have been a pretty significant step for your congregation to make, because you guys have been Southern Baptists for 100 years or something?
Not quite 100, 78 years we've been Southern Baptist. Prior to that, we were with the BMA, which is in East Texas, historically so. But it was a big decision because we have people in our church that have strong connections to the SBC. We have former IMB missionaries. We have parents who have IMB missionaries and NAMB church planters that are children, I should say, that are in our church. We have former SBC heads of institutions. We're a very strongly committed Southern Baptist church, as well as last year we gave roughly $250,000 to SBC causes.
Yeah.
So we're all in.
Yeah.
Okay. When you think about that, so it has been a very difficult decision.
You know, I've heard, I don't know, I should have kept account, but dozens and dozens of churches that have left or have made the decision to leave the SBC over just even since the meeting in Nashville. So just in the last few months since June. Prior to that, you know, in addition, the year before, really since 2019, you know, dozens of churches that have left the SBC. So there's no telling how many. It'd be interesting to find the statistics. If what I know of personally is any indication of the broader efforts, there's got to be a noticeable dip in church membership and alignment of affiliation with the SBC. And here you've got a church that's, you know, very happily up until recent years participating in the Southern Baptist Convention that now has a task force studying it. And that's probably a good move. I mean, rather than just completely rejecting and say we're going to walk away, form a task force. Let the people who went to the SBC that came back and reported to your church, look, this is what we saw, and these are things that are very disturbing to us. And let's study this and consider if this is good stewardship of our resources and relationships. So, I commend you in that. Our own church, our elders have done something similar to that, and we've led the church, and our church has redirected our financial giving. For this year, we're not going to give to the cooperative program anymore this year. We're still continuing to give to International Mission Board and support international missions through that work. Disaster relief, we're still supporting that. And then we're going to decide, based upon how things go the next couple of years, whether or not we can go back to giving to the cooperative program or need to do something even further removed than what we are now. And, you know, one of the things too, Tom, I mean, you took your full complement of messengers, which is a good thing to go to the convention, because that just doesn't happen. The overwhelming majority of our churches, 85% plus of Southern Baptist churches, never send a messenger to the annual meeting. So they don't have a voice in what happens there. And of course, we know that SBC workers and all the SBC executives and such, they have their ways paid to the convention. So they get to go as messengers from their churches, most likely, and they get to vote in whatever they deem to be wise and good. And the overwhelming majority of our churches just simply don't have a voice because they've trusted the leadership, or they haven't taken the initiative to try to get involved. So I would encourage every Southern Baptist church to take money from wherever you got to get it in your budget and finance sending messengers, however many you can send from your church, to Anaheim in June of 2022 in order to vote and to make your voice known. Study the issues, study the candidates who will be running for president, and then vote in accordance with your own conscience and what your congregation wants to be as Southern Baptist Church and what they want the convention to be. To me, that's just simple stewardship The day of just trusting and sending your money is over. We've got to go. We got to show up, speak up, and cause our voices to be heard.
Last year at the convention, correct my memory, did not somebody come up with a fund in order to send pastors to the convention in order to vote?
I don't know, Tom.
Well, that was me, and I got heavily criticized for that. Because what was said was that I was paying people to go vote for the candidate that I wanted them to vote for, which is absurd.
Right.
What I did say is because they, one of the guys that's pro CRT and was pro Ed Litton asked me if I would pay his way, and I said, well, I'm not that dumb. I am from Tennessee. I understand, and so that's kind of what got the rumor going. But I'm like, I'm not going to fund somebody to go up there and vote in a way that I think is damaging to the Southern Baptist Convention. That would be stupid. But I didn't say they had to vote for Mike Stone.
Mm-hmm.
I simply said that I'm not funding anybody to vote for Ed Litton because his wife preaches on stage with him. We didn't even have the plagiarism scandal. There was plenty of reason to not vote for Ed Litton without the scandal we have going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and they criticized me for that. These same people didn't criticize Danny Aiken when he publicly tells everybody to vote for Ed Litton.
I know.
So, which is, again, the hypocrisy is what drives me crazy in all this.
Well,
we did start that fund. And so they could have voted for Moeller. They could have voted for Stone. They could have voted for Randy Adams. Yeah. Right. So the only person I was like, hey, I'm not funding you to go there is to vote for Ed Litton. And I don't apologize for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doesn't NAMB pay for pastors to come in, church planters to come into the Southern Baptist Convention?
Don't you sound like the Washington Post now? The Washington Post actually reported that, and I just simply called attention to the fact that the Washington Post reported it. And I had some NAMB guys come after me. How dare you, Tom? You can talk to us. I said, well, talk to the reporter. Good night. If he's not telling the truth, talk to the reporter. Tom, you mentioned Danny Aiken, the president of Southeastern Seminary, and earlier you mentioned that some of our seminaries seem to be complicit in allowing this plagiarism scandal to just continue on in the convention. What do you mean by that, and what do you see happening in terms of our seminaries with this whole issue of stealing other people's sermons and preaching them as if they're your own?
Yeah, I think that this is multi-layered. Okay, so you have the issue, first of all, plagiarism. And I think all of us as pastors have got to examine the way that, we present things in the pulpit, because I would say that if you went through any of our sermons over a 25-year period, there's probably a time where we have used a sentence or something of that nature that we saw somewhere else or read somewhere else and we didn't give credit to it. And I think all of us need to think through that issue. That's not what we're talking about with Ed Litton. We're not talking about that he even took a paragraph from a commentary and didn't say, hey, I got this from a commentary. So I think that's one layer. The second layer is what he did is he took someone else's sermon and he essentially made it his own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then he preached the illustrations as well. The illustrations are not as problematic to me. I mean, I've used illustrations that other people have used.
But you don't pretend that their experience was your experience, do you?
Well, that's the fourth one. Because an illustration may be, I don't know. There's all kinds of illustrations you can have of a historical event, for example, that you saw in a commentary is a historical event. Use that in your sermon. You don't necessarily say, I got this from that commentary.
Right.
But the integrity issue that goes the deepest, because he said that he had permission from JD, which is ridiculous. That's laziness. So you got laziness involved, you have stealing involved, and then you have finally a deep integrity issue when he tells life stories of JD Greer, and then he tells them as if they're his own experiences, and that is extremely problematic. And so anyway, I think that. As we look at this, we've got to have our seminaries who are willing to speak out and will speak out very boldly that this is wrong. Now, I'm not saying they should call for Ed Litton's resignation, even though Jim Hamilton and Denny Burke at Southern Seminary have called for his resignation publicly.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe, at the very least, the seminary should make it clear that we believe this is wrong. We're not going to train men in our seminaries to go into the pulpit. We're trusting them to train men to go into SBC pulpits and around the world as missionaries, and they can't come out and say that that was wrong.
Yeah.
The political animals are our entity heads in so many ways. Thankfully, Al Mohler has spoken out against it. Jason Allen has spoken out against it, but Southeastern and Southwestern are both complicit in either being passive and still promoting him in the pulpit, which is Southeastern did, or very active to give a defense for him, which is what Southwestern did in Adam Greenway. And I've spoke to both of those men, both of those presidents of those seminaries, about my concerns regarding Ed Litton.
Yeah. Yeah, and that you've just voiced the concerns and frustrations of a lot of pastors and a lot of churches. And again, I applaud Denny Burke and Jim Hamilton for leading their eldership to come out and call for Ed Litton's resignation. That's something we might ought to consider doing here, amongst our own eldership and congregation as well. But it's just tragic to me that we have these leaders, these men who are heads of institutions and organizations, that if they're not going to come out and just decry this, which I think they ought to, they at least shouldn't become complicit in it. And they're doing it while we're paying their salaries. And so, I mean, that's where we are as an SBC. And folks will get mad at a guy like you or me saying, well, you're just being divisive. No, we're just shining the light on what is going on. We're not making up these things. These things are happening, and it's just not right. It's not right. And so, what recourse do you have? Well, your church has started a study to see, are we going to continue down this same road? Our task force will report back to the congregation. Congregation will make decisions. And if Southern Baptist entity heads want to drive more churches out of the SBC, just keep doing what you're doing. That makes good sense to me.
Yeah.
But if you're really concerned about churches that have had a 70-year plus history in the SBC, been faithful participants in the SBC, being heard and their concerns being given serious consideration, well then, okay, listen up and let's talk. So praise God.
Absolutely.
Yeah, praise God for your efforts to reach out and to have these conversations. Well, we have seen the North American Mission Board, I think, in response to your actions, larger than anyone else that I know about, in calling attention to the fact that the North American Mission Board was financing church planters and church plants that had women pastors. And you kept talking about this, you kept showing evidence, you kept getting pushback saying, Tom, you're just making this up. This isn't a big deal. We've only found 6 churches out of however many thousand that we've planted, and you just kept showing more. Well, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. And the evidence was overwhelming. And finally, they couldn't deny it anymore, I guess, or I don't know what happened. But just, a week or two ago, they came out with a statement on pastoral leadership guidance for our planters, in which they clearly affirm that women cannot be pastors in NAMB-funded church plants. Now, they also make it clear that, once you are no longer being funded by NAMB, if you want to put a woman pastor in there, then that's your decision. We're not going to comment on that. So, man, what do you, how do you view that statement by NAMB and this new kind of direction that's very, very vocal, very public?
Well, I mean, I have multiple feelings on it. I wish that they had, what they did is they came out and said, hey, we're telling you what our policy is. That's always been our policy, and it's what we've always done, even though Tom Buck and Critical Resurgence Voices and others have proven that we haven't been doing that. I mean, they didn't say that last part.
Conservative Resurgence Voices. Wait a minute. They're going to get mad at you if you call them Critical Resurgence Voices. So.
Did I say Critical Resurgence?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Conservative Resurgence Voices. Well, there's the Freudian slip.
There you go.
But anyway, we had been pointing this out, that group and myself, for some time. And guys in that group had actually lost all hope, and they weren't talking about it anymore. But I just kept hammering it because, hey, we need answers on this. Mm-hmm. So NAMB finally did come out. And what I'm thankful about, they not only said they can't be pastors, they even said, let me just read it to you. It says, NAMB requires that endorsed planters align with the practice of the majority of Southern Baptist churches, that only qualified men will hold the office or title of pastor. So there you've got that. That only qualified men can hold the title, the office or title. So you can't have a co-pastor as a woman. You cannot have an associate pastor as a woman. That's a big step that they've made that clear.
Yeah.
And then it says, and as such, serve as the communicator for teaching and preaching in the main gatherings or worship services. That's huge.
Yeah.
Because there were all kinds of, and when I say all kinds of, at well over 20 churches that I had documented where women in NAMB church plants were preaching in the corporate gathering. They say it was only 6. They were talking specifically about, they found 6 churches where a woman had the title of lead pastor or co-lead pastor or something like that. But it was much deeper than that. We sent a packet to them. I had several conversations with Ezel. I think but we still got more work to do. I talked to my church last night about this, because here's the language that they use is that they're going to align with the practice of the majority of Southern Baptist churches.
Yeah.
Well, how about the aligning with Scripture and aligning with what our Baptist faith and message says, which is scripturally based, biblically based? That's where we need this to eventually go. Now, let me give the benefit of the doubt in this. I think that what NAMB is doing, if I put the best benefit of the doubt on it that I can, is they're saying we're not, so many people say that the Baptist faith and message is not clear enough. And they decided that they would go with what the majority of Southern Baptist churches do. Well, I don't want to depend on what the majority of the Southern Baptist churches do.
Yeah.
I want to depend on what Scripture says. If we need to tighten up the language of our Baptist faith and message, let's do it. So we should be thankful and happy, which I am, that Dr. Ezel has come out with this statement. But we should see in the statement itself the pragmatic language, which is problematic in the SBC as it always has been, and how we've got to move away from this majority concept of how SBC churches practice ecclesiology and get down to saying, what do the Scriptures say? So I'm both thankful and cautious at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Theology of my majority has never been a safe guide, and we do have a statement. We do have a confession, and it kind of saddens me that we tried to strengthen the statement on that very issue a couple of years ago, and that was turned down. So we just need to keep trying to do that. But Tom, I want to just publicly commend you for your determined efforts and not being put off, despite being told some pretty harsh things and despite getting pushback and having pot shots taken at you publicly by people who don't know better about what all was going on, and they just found themselves in a position to try to score points against you with your determination to bring this issue and keep it before the churches, the SBC. I think God's owned your efforts. And so thank you in behalf of a lot of pastors, a lot of churches, for your willingness to just stand firm and be immovable in the face of all kind of onslaught.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the things I am tenacious. There's no doubt of that. But what most people don't know, particularly those that just read what I say, is I really am a happy warrior, if you will, in the sense that I love our convention. I love people. I'm passionate about truth. And I love these men that I disagree with.
Sure.
I mean, I do very much. I talk with them. When I have opportunity, even though I've had strong disagreements with Dr. Ezel, I was sincere when he made a change in the statement that I wanted to publicly thank him in that. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is continue to press forward, continue to speak truth. Don't let what others do in trying to misdefine your motives and question your motives or assign motives, I guess, to you. You just have to continue to stand for what's true and be tenacious, but at the same time, be ready to forgive where forgiveness needs to be given. Be ready to sit down and have a meal over these conversations and be joyful in the process of that. And you don't have to be mean-spirited in everything you do. The problem is that when you continue to press on these issues, if just standing for truth today is considered to be mean-spirited, and that's sad.
That's right. No, you're exactly right. I mentioned Sunday in a sermon, Sunday morning, on the last verses, 18 through 21 of Romans 10, that plain spokenness today, being plain in your speech, which Paul does by quoting Isaiah, saying he's even more bold as to say that today is regarded as harsh. That's regarded as being unwilling to be entreated. That's regarded as being mean-spirited. And it's just, there's nothing further from the truth in that. We speak the truth in love, and if we really love, we will speak the truth, and we won't back away from the truth. And so I think you've demonstrated that and exemplified it in a very helpful way, which makes you a wonderful speaker for the conference coming up in January, Militant and Triumphant, the Doctrine of the Church. So if you want to know more about this and how to do this and what this looks like, then we've got a lineup of men who are committed to doing this exact thing. And we encourage you to go to founders.org, sign up for this conference. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. Man, I look forward to seeing you in January. You're going to be glad to be here in Southwest Florida in January rather than East Texas in January. You can take selfies and send back to your folks that are freezing and say, look what I'm doing here in sunny Southwest Florida.
I'm sure that they'll appreciate that very much if I send those pictures to them.
Yeah, right. And Graham, remind us again of the sale that's going on and how people can get 20% off of their conference registration for the next week.
Yeah, so starting today, going until the 31st, if you purchase anything from Founders Press, you get 31% off of that purchase. And then you also get a 20% discount for registration to the Founders National Conference.
Thank you so much for listening to the Sword and the Trowel.